job openings just got cut by like 1.5 million, which
Yeah.
is a big number in the context of job openings. And that was restatement of the past few months plus the latest month's number. So it wasn't, the market wasn't as strong as it seemed, and the current numbers are pretty weak too.
The Financial Survival Network. Now more than ever.
And welcome. You are listening to Watching the Financial Survival Network. I'm your host, Kerry Lutz. Hey, we're at the third to last day or second to last day of the month. We got John Rubino on with us. John, labor market data is mixed. Are we adding jobs? Are we taking jobs away? One thing's for sure. This time we know the jobs aren't going to China, right?
Hey, Kerry. No, it doesn't look like it, but there is a lot of stuff going on out there that are kind of cross-currenty in the economy, and the labor market is a big example of that, because just in the last few months, unions have been striking or threatening to strike and getting some serious settlements. Two of the big airlines, United and American in the U.S., both gave their pilot unions double-digit raises for the next 4 years, so over 10% a year. For 4 straight years. Yeah, 40 some percent. Yeah. And that's double-digit wage inflation right there. And the Fed knows, the Fed doesn't see rising stock market and real estate prices as inflation. It ignores those. But when wages go up, it takes that very seriously. So make of that what you will about the elites or whatever. But unions are now suddenly finding themselves with some power, and they've got a lot of ground to make up. So they're threatening to strike, or they are striking. And who else was it? It was it FedEx or UPS? One of those guys just gave their union employees big raises, and so that's spreading across the country. So we've got wage inflation coming from the unionized sectors of the economy, but at the same time, the labor market in general seems to be weakening. The job openings just got cut by like 1.5 million, which is a big number in the context of job openings. And that was restatement of the past few months plus the latest month's number. So it wasn't, the market wasn't as strong as it seemed, and the current numbers are pretty weak too. And so home sales at the same time, which is that's almost up there with employment as far as a sector that affects the overall strength of the economy. Home sales are frozen now. They got revised down dramatically over the past few months, and currently they're way down year over year, which makes sense, right? Because mortgage rates have spiked, which effectively doubles the monthly cost of a house if the house price doesn't come down. And so far, prices haven't come down. So only cash buyers are still robust in this market. Like the people flying in from out of the country to Florida, buying Miami condos and stuff.
A lot of sight unseen buys.
Yeah, see that is still a strong part of the market. But in other places where people actually have to take out mortgages, forget it. And, you really can't do it unless you're going to buy half the house that you can afford, which means you're going to settle for something that nobody buys half the house they can afford. Because if they can afford more house, they tend to get excited and buy the most house they can afford, because that's how the shopping process works. So if houses aren't selling, that means people can't take out the mortgage to buy them. That's going to slow the economy down dramatically too. So, most signs point towards a slowing economy, but in certain sectors, wages are going up dramatically. Now, the Fed is liable to interpret this as wage inflation becoming a problem, and they're liable to go higher for longer with interest rates, which is what Jerome Powell just said in his last speech. He surprised the market by implying that rates were going to go higher and stay there longer than the markets were expecting. So who knows? But it doesn't look like we're going to get Fed easing anytime soon. And what I think is going to happen is there has to be that big crisis out there. Some part of the sector of the market has to break. And then the Fed will go back to bailing everybody inside out, and it'll happen quickly. Remember how quickly they bailed out the banking sector when Silicon Valley Bank
And they're still
imploded?
bailing it out. Let's
Yeah, they're
not
still
forget
bailing
that.
it out. Yeah, but they didn't waste any time. Within a week, they were doing things that added liquidity to the market.
Well,
So let something bigger go
they
bust.
messed up. They messed up there because what happened there was that Janet Yellen drew the line in the sand. We're not going to bail out banks. This time is different. And then Silicon Valley Bank failed, and they took like a week or two to bail it out, to find a quote unquote suitor for it. And then 3 other banks failed, and then all of a sudden they said, no, just kidding. All deposits are backstopped. We're not going to let you lose your deposits. We're not going to have bail-ins, regardless what Dodd-Frank said, and that was that. So in Florida, sales are down like a third, but prices are up because inventories are still incredibly short. I mean, that's the thing. It's a tale of several markets, but in popular places, even though the sales are down, the inventory is still down. So what that will amount to, I don't know, but people are still fleeing to these key states like Texas, like Tennessee, Georgia, the Carolinas, basically the Southeast, where low taxes more than make up for increased mortgage rates.
Well, see, the migration thing is kind of a wash, though, because if you're in California and you want to move to Texas, you kind of have to sell your California house. And if you don't have to sell your California house, you're in the top 1%. And we're not talking about you, 99% of the country pretty much has to sell one house to move into another. So you get a sale over here and a purchase over there, and it doesn't affect the macro numbers all that much. But the question is, for housing, what is going to make inventory spike and cause prices to crash? And I think it's going to be 2 things. One is baby boomer demographics. We're getting older, and so far boomers have not sold their McMansions. The idea was always that there was going to be a demographic real estate crash because the richest, biggest generation in American history had loaded up on real estate and bought too much house during previous credit bubbles. And they can't go up and down the stairs in a 3-story house anymore. And who's going to keep 4,000 square feet clean? It's just something that a 75-year-old doesn't want to deal with. But a growing number of boomers are heading into that age range. And so they kind of have to start lightening up. They got to downsize. So that's going to happen. The question is, will something happen to spook boomers into doing it all at once, or will it be more a gradual thing?
Okay.
The other thing, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, don't forget, many of you out there have 3% mortgages, and you want to downsize, and assuming you don't buy the house for cash, you're going to get a mortgage. You're going to get a 7% mortgage, which means your mortgage will be double dollar for dollar. So you buy half the house and your payment stays the same. So why move?
That's why everybody's frozen in their houses right now, because moving is an incredibly expensive process. You're leaving a cheap money place, going to an expensive money place. And yet, at some point, it's going to happen just because all those stairs.
Luckily, in this place, I don't have any. Thank you. That's one of the reasons I bought it, because it's on one level. But I totally know what you're saying. And who wants the maintenance, the upkeep? You own a house, you get to be real good friends with your handyman, your plumber, your electrician, and there's always stuff breaking on it, always. And there's always stuff to do.
My wife and I had a 6,000 square foot house in Idaho, and that was insane. We'd become empty nesters, and there were just the 2 of us in this big house where empty rooms get dusty. Even if you don't do anything in there, you go away for a week and it's covered in dust. So the maintenance is insane. And so we did the downsizing thing.
And valves and toilets go bad, and they start running, and faucets drip, even though no one's using it. It's bad.
If you have 5 bathrooms, something, yeah, like you said, something is always dripping. We had this, okay, wait, I'm going to get too far afield here, but we had a plumber who, I was only partially kidding. I offered him our spare bedroom. I told him he could move in if he wanted to, because he's at our house so often, and he saves my butt every time a thing leaks. But anyhow, yeah, see, that's the situation that boomers are in now, especially with multi-story houses, of course, because it really is like, if you got a hip that's going and you need to get it replaced, but you're trying to put off the replacement, which is probably 70% of 65-year-olds right now. You don't want to sleep on the third floor, have all your your TV room in the walkout basement, and then have the kitchen on the first floor. It's just it's a crazy life, very painful. So anyhow, that's one thing. The other thing is Airbnb. Now suddenly, because let's say you got 17 properties, which is not an unusual number for these Airbnb entrepreneurs.
I know.
You have major carrying costs. And the minute your revenue dips, you have to start lightening up on inventory. And, hospitality is usually a victim of a slowing economy. Fewer people are in hotels, fewer people can afford Airbnb, especially Airbnb turned out not to be a good deal anyhow. It's got all those hidden fees and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's not even really that popular anymore compared to hotels, which are at least clean and simple and understandable. So there's going to be a deluge of inventory out of Airbnbs as soon as the economy has any kind of a little hiccup. And that deluge is going to just pour onto the market because there's so many Airbnb units. I think that I don't have the stat correct or perfect, but it's something like the inventory of houses that the owners don't actually live in is 10 or 20 times the inventory currently for sale right now. So they, Airbnb trouble could just swamp the existing market for homes, for pre-owned homes, and that could happen.
So in 2021, the U.S. had an average of 2.25 million active listings. So I think that's 2.25 million units. France had 1.2. China had 1.15. And we actually have statistics on all this stuff, John. Well, this is night state. That's not going to do us any good.
Okay, but it does get you somewhere when you compare that with inventory of homes for sale and throw in houses that have been bought as investments, just places to park your cash, because the average rich person owns 3 or 4 properties now. Yeah,
Nashville is a city where they had like thousands of units built just to be Airbnbs. They're built specific for that purpose. 3-4 story, buildings with units in them, and you don't go all out on the kitchens. You just make the place look nice and clean. You don't go all out on anything on it. And, you make it conducive to people who are short stay vacation type tenants. And that isn't necessarily what a renter wants when it was built use specific. So going to be interesting, but talk about real estate problems and bubbles and collapses. China, supposedly there's 64 million units that are empty in the entire country. And, it is the largest asset class in the world, Chinese real estate. Fortunately, only Chinese own it. And most of it's substandard construction, not built to spec. And, in China, it's like in the United States, you don't start paying your mortgage till you close on your house. In China, you pay the mortgage when you sign on the dotted line, and it could be years before you even get that house or that apartment. And that's what's led to mass defaults, strategic defaults. And then in China, your foreclosure might happen, but your debt never goes away, and it's in your social credit score. And I guess you could probably move to Siberia and be happier than staying in China once you got the reputation as a deadbeat, you know? So it's an untenable situation that's made worse by the system, by the corruption, and by malinvestment, because they didn't need 64 million units to stay empty, John, you know?
Yeah, China blew itself the biggest real estate bubble in human history. And it's bursting, and they're trying to figure out what to do about it. They're easing in various ways. They're cutting interest rates and running up bigger deficits. But at the same time, the yuan is falling. So they're in that box that we've been talking about for the Fed all these years, when the currency is falling, but you still have to stimulate the economy because you've got some sectors blowing up. But the more you stimulate the zombie sectors, the more the currency drops, which is inflationary. So you got this this death spiral potential in China right now. We don't know how it's going to play out exactly, but they're in the early stages of something like that. So it's and it's not clear they understand how to fix any of this either, because remember, these guys are, it's a communist dictatorship. they don't really get markets. They get you can dictate to the banks to lend to housing. They know markets work from that point of view, but they don't really know how markets clear via the price mechanism and through bankruptcy and things like that. And I don't think they like the idea when they hear it. Yeah.
Listen to this. You're going to love this, because human nature, being human nature, the government tries to stop you from doing things. As long as they don't throw you in jail, you just figure out ways around it and deal with the fallout later. So in China, if you bought a place for like 500,000 yuan and the market price is 250,000 yuan, they won't let you sell it for that. Okay. You're not allowed to sell it for a loss, because that's going to disrupt the market. So you know what these smart people do, John? You're going to love this. And I saw this on China Fact Chasers. These guys speak Mandarin. They're fluent. They know what's going on there. They have sources all over. They will say, all right, I'll sell it to you for 500,000, or I'll buy it for 500,000, but you got to give me 250,000 back, 250,000 yuan back in gold. So it appears that the prices are staying higher, but under the table, they're paying off the buyer in gold to reduce the price, but the stated price of the unit, the stated sale price, stays up there, and everybody's happy. And this is the problem with price controls and really even more corrupt than our central government.
Yeah.
And is that great?
Yeah, that's but and in the end, you still did sell your house for half what you paid for it.
Yeah.
If I'm understanding that process. So losses are still being taken. People are being impoverished. And that has to play out somewhere. Somewhere those losses have to be booked. And at some point, somebody goes bankrupt. And that's what China is facing right now, that there's really no way out of a credit bubble except to take the losses. You can't move them around forever, and you can't paper them over forever. And China's going to find that out. So it's not clear how this all plays out. China's got a lot of problems right now. They've got big demographic issues too. The one China policy, or one child policy for all those years, left them with a shortage of women. So they don't have households forming. They've got a lot of very lonely guys with no prospects for ever having a family or anything. And that's economically a big problem too, because you don't have you don't have a lot of babies being born in that kind of a situation. So their population is actually shrinking, and it's not clear how a capitalist economy survives, especially a financialized capitalist economy where there's a lot of debt. Survives a shrinking population, because you've already got all these retirees that have to be taken care of.
Oh, yeah.
But if there aren't enough workers to do that, there's not enough tax revenue coming in. The government then has to make good on those promises by printing money, which destroys the currency, and so on. So China has multiple problems that all lead to a gigantic currency crisis. We'll just have to see about the timing. But otherwise, I think the yuan is in trouble.
The mother of all, because they're cutting their rates, and the yuan is basically disintegrating. So I want to revisit a topic that I know is on both of our lists for today, and that is the BRICS countries. Now, everybody's saying the BRICS, well, they want to get rid of the dollar. All right, well, that's a foregone conclusion. It's going to happen at some point. I don't particularly think it's this point, but China's own currency is on the brink of crisis. The country is having a meltdown, the equivalent of what the United States had in 1929, only much worse because they've got about 15 times or about 8 times more people than the U.S. had. The U.S. had like under 100 million people back then. And, so China has to find a way out of their own currency crisis that is inevitable and that is going. And the more the yuan goes into crisis, the better it is for the dollar on a relative basis, and the other world's currencies that may hold value, like the euro and even the Canadian dollar, the Australian dollar. So they need a way out. And I think the BRICS concept is as much a way out for these countries to flee their own failing currencies as it is for them to stick it to the U.S. Just my theory. I could be wrong, but I personally have celebrated the death of the dollar many times and have been totally off the mark.
Yeah. Okay. Several things about that. The big fiat currencies like the dollar and the yen and the euro are all losing value. We had a 10% inflation officially in 2022, and it hasn't gone back down to 2% yet. So they're losing value, and they will continue to lose value. That's a
given.
Separate issue. Yeah, it's a given, and it's a separate issue from the BRICS. But yeah, it's not clear how the BRICS could. They couldn't go completely to another shared currency. They couldn't do a euro kind of common currency market at all, because their currencies are too unstable. That would be like a bunch of Italy's trying to form a currency union without a Germany to anchor them.
The sum of the is greater than the whole, that little synergistic thing.
Yeah.
They think they can pull off, right?
Well, what Jim Rickards had an interesting take on this, and he said that they wouldn't get rid of their own national currencies, but what they would do is create a shared trading currency for them to trade back and forth with each other. So Russia doesn't have to take rupees, which it can't use for much of anything, in return for its oil. It would take that gold-backed common currency. And, these guys have been accumulating gold for quite a while. So it's possible that at the right price, gold would have to be revalued upward, but maybe not so much that it becomes debilitating. And they back their shared currency with gold, and they just trade with each other in something that represents a certain weight of gold. And so their currencies can do what they do, their national currencies, but they've still got this trading currency, which is rock solid. And that would be technically pretty tricky too, but it's something that, if it could be pulled off, would make a ton of sense, because that's a great currency to have for bilateral trade, because you always know what it's worth. The dollar price of gold exists out there 24/7. So you always basically have a dollar cross rate for your currency. So in theory, that could be done. And that would explain their aggressive accumulation of gold, or it would give them a reason to rationalize their accumulation of gold. So we'll see. I don't know. I think they're a long way from anything like that.
The problem is, nobody's going to trust it. Hey, look, our banks are in trouble, but so far the Fed has backstopped them, and we're not going to see any bank runs. We'll see a currency collapse before we see a bank run. John, you agree with that? Probably.
Well, I see the bank run leading to a currency collapse. Yeah, it could well play out that way for sure.
But in China, the banks have already collapsed, but it's not like publicized. Like, there are a bunch of banks that have collapsed, and the people like try to get their money out, and they say, "Oh, later, don't worry about it. Your money's safe. Your money is safe. Don't worry about a thing," right? But the reality is that they've got daily currency withdrawal restrictions in their banks in place. And I'm going to toot my own horn here for a change. I said years ago, half the reason they were doing the Belt and Road Initiative and all of these projects outside of China that were money losers, they were doing it to get money out of the country. It was flight capital disguised as investment capital, supposedly achieving the PPC's goals of investing outside the country and building influence. But in reality, they were laundering money out of the country and putting it into money losing projects, because if the project's making money, then you got to bring it back to China. But if it's losing money and nobody really knows the scope of the losses, then you got to keep feeding it, because the Chinese don't want the project to collapse, because then there's a loss of face. So they've used this to literally launder trillions of dollars out of the PRC. This is what's happened, man. I know it. You can see it now. It's as clear as day now that they're in trouble.
Yeah. That wasn't an actual capitalist country.
No,
not that we are. When I criticize some other place, it doesn't mean I'm saying America is better. I think
not at all.
Yeah, the elites in the U.S. also have $1 billion stashed all over the place.
Did you catch the article? Like 13,500 of the wealthiest Chinese have fled the country.
No, I didn't see that, but
yeah.
Hey, that's why Vancouver has the most expensive real estate.
Yeah, Vancouver.
Vancouver.
Yeah. And like they just busted this woman who is the head of the largest Chinese immigration company that helped people get out of the country. And she didn't do anything wrong. They just busted her for whatever reason. They busted her, right?
Yeah, I didn't see any of that, but I totally believe that that's the case. And see, that's another reason why you can't have a competing reserve currency with the dollar when your country has capital controls in place.
Yeah. It's got to be free flow.
Yeah, you have to be able to move that money around with nobody putting you in jail for it. So Russia and China are not ready for that yet.
No, and that's not to say they won't be. I think there's going to be a major house cleaning in China and Russia too, for that matter. But the house cleaning is going to take place in China first. There is I want to call it a theory, but a belief, maybe a superstition widely held in China, that every dynasty, it's not necessarily a superstition, but a belief that every dynasty ends with massive flooding, and then the regime is faced with its own inability to deal with that flooding, and then they get swept out. And that is potentially where the PRC, the PPC, whatever, is People's Party, whatever, Communist Party, CPP. I've been calling it the wrong thing. Chinese Communist Party. That's potentially CCP. That's potentially where we're at right now. And that combined with what's happening in Russia, I don't know whether Ukraine's winning or losing. If you watch their propaganda, they're about to drive a wooden stake through Putin's heart, or what the space where a normal person would have a heart, right? And but sometimes in this world, you win by not losing, right? And the fact that they haven't lost yet, they might very well lose. I think it's probable they will. But the fact that they haven't now for almost 2 years makes them the winner here, right? I think we're in for a massive cataclysm around the world. John, can you name one country for me where they like their government?
Well,
is there one?
No, when you start borrowing insane amounts of money, the government loses the trust of the people, and that's where we are now. The whole trust
Global.
horizon thing, where it's global. Nobody trusts their government because their government is broke.
Maybe it's
I mean, Switzerland's not broke, and actually Russia is not broke. They didn't accumulate too much debt, and they have a lot of gold and oil. So, but the Russia-Ukraine thing, Russia wins if Ukraine is neutralized and NATO does not go any further. And I think we're close to that.
At what price? At what price? 250,000 casualties. That's not a win. And, wars are inflationary in and of themselves. So inflation is going to pick up because of these wars. In every area where there's a war, there's inflation.
Yeah, absolutely. But if global inflation pushes up the price of oil and gold and the other stuff Russia has, remember, they're a resource economy. So they actually benefit partially from that.
Yeah.
But I mean, they're thinking national. See, this is an existential thing for Russia. They cannot have NATO on their border.
It's existential now because I think the West has perceived. I think it's much like World War I. The West has perceived Russia as a declining empire, and World War I was about carving up pieces of declining empires. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was like this accidental agglomeration of countries that Austria-Hungary never really set out to do. They just it all fell in their lap. And then the Ottoman Turk Empire, and it was all about chopping that up for resources. And now the intent of this war has always been, I realized this recently, to chop up the Russian Empire for resources because it holds some of the most, treasured and highest grade resources that haven't been developed in any country in the world. And they want to chop it up. And China wants their piece too. They want Siberia so they can get the resources in Siberia and get rid of a bunch of people. They've been colonizing or attempting to colonize the Sino-Russian border for 40 years, and the Russians have resisted it. But I wonder what's happening there now. Nobody has reported upon it.
Well, the difference between today and World War I is that we're talking about we're carving up nuclear powers. Now if you've got hypersonic nuclear tipped missiles, nobody's going to carve you up. One of those missiles can take out an entire aircraft carrier group or a major city. I mean, Seattle could be vaporized in literally 20 minutes if they make the decision right this minute. So So if I wouldn't put anything past the psychopaths running the U.S. government. They might actually think they're going to occupy and carve up Russia, but they're not, because that's an existential threat to Russia, obviously, by definition, and they've got nukes. So so don't do that, neocons. Please don't try to do that. This is
the stupidity that we're dealing with, though. Like we say, John, what do we learn from history? The one thing we learn from history is we don't learn from history. I mean, if Turkey had a nuke or Austria had a nuke in World War I, the result would have been a lot different, right?
Oh my God! In World War I, they totally would have used those weapons too, because they were, they were morons.
Yeah.
Thing. And they were all existentially threatened. Everybody was existentially threatened back then. So that could have easily turned into a nuclear war. And so could this. So I think
still happen.
The lesson is don't put morons in charge of your country. That's the
and war should definitely be a last resort, not, they say war is what happens when it's just a way of resolving disputes when politics can't, or something to that effect. I
think it's something like diplomacy is war by another name or something.
Right. War is a form of diplomacy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever. It's it's a really interesting situation. Hey, we're so lucky here in the United States. For now, we could sit back in our chairs on our Zoom calls and pontificate. It's not real to us, but that's what's happening. There's no other reason to go after Russia other than to plunder it. And we kind of did that after communism fell and Yeltsin came in, and we kind of pushed through all these oligarchs. But then, Yeltsin got wise and he let Putin come in, and Putin replaced our oligarchs with his oligarchs. And hey, by no means do we support this man. I think he's a stone cold killer who's capable of anything. But I think big mistake initiating this war, even though he probably was pushed into it. Hey, well, that is it for today. We really ran long there, but that's okay. Make sure you go to John's Substack, RubinoSubstack.com, our site, financialsurvivalnetwork.com. John, we'll touch base in a couple weeks.
Thanks, Kerry. See ya.